As a reminder, if you haven't already gotten your ticket for the raffle, our first raffle drawing is going to be on our next break. So go get your ticket now because we have an incredible book by one of our fabulous speakers. It's being raffled off and she's willing to sign it for you. Hey, Jesse. That door is not. You have to lock it. Okay, so our next panel is Grounding the Struggle, Bridging Gaps in Reproductive and Disability Justice in the South. And our moderator is Dean Laura McNally. She's the Associate Dean for Experiential Education and the Director of the Milton and Charlotte Kramer Law Clinic at Case Western Reserve University School of Law. A dedicated educator and advocate, she's played a key role in expanding the law school's experiential learning opportunities. Sorry, I have asthma. Ensuring students gain hands-on legal training across various practice areas. Since joining the faculty in 2005, McNally has been instrumental in shaping the law school's experiential education curriculum. Under her leadership, the program has grown to include a broad range of clinics, externships, and advocacy programs designed to equip students with practical legal skills. As director of the Health Law Clinic, she has fostered interdisciplinary collaborations with healthcare providers and community organizations to address legal barriers to health and social justice. Her practice and research focuses on poverty law, disability, children's rights, health law, and interdisciplinary education.
All right. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say I'm also a proud protection and advocacy organization attorney. That's where I started my career in Alabama. So this panel was really an interesting one for me because of my time in the South. So I'm happy to be here, even though reproductive justice and rights aren't my key issues, but disability rights and children's rights has been for most of my career. So this panel will explore the ways in which pregnancy-capable folks at the intersection of racial identity, gender, sexuality, and disability status experience barriers to accessing sexual health and reproductive support. Speakers will examine these challenges and discuss steps that medical providers, support workers, and educators can take to prioritize accessibility and deliver truly inclusive care. As you can see, I have one panelist at the moment, so I will only introduce one person, but I'm sure it'll be a robust conversation. And to my right, I have Mia Ives Rubley, and she's the Senior Director of the Disability Justice Initiative at American Progress. Prior to her work at American Progress, she advocated for disability justice and inclusion at nonprofit organizations and businesses across the United States. She has worked with Women's March, Families Belong Together, DC Action Lab, Adoptees for Justice, Fair Fight, People's Collective for Justice and Liberation, and numerous other progressive organizations. Best known for founding the Women's March Disability Caucus, she helped organize the original Women's March on Washington in 2017. The Women's March was one of the first large-scale events to have access to disability accommodations at progressive events and more policy platforms inclusive of the disability community. I have to shout out the mainstream media that you've also received acknowledgement in. So for her work on the Women's March, she was named by Glamour magazine as one of our 2017 Women of the Year, and was also recognized by She the People as one of the 20 women of color in politics to watch in 2020, and awarded the 2019 Distinguished Alumni Award from the University of North Carolina School of Social Work. For 6 years, I've really worked as a vocational counselor at the North Carolina Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services to help disabled people obtain substantial employment and connection with services in their communities. Again, another shout out. Thank you so much for that work. She researched alternative mental health diversion programs at UNC Chapel Hill in 2015. And in 2017 was the confidential assistant to Commissioner Chai Feldblum at the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. At the Ford Foundation in 2019, she also created a disability inclusion toolkit for nonprofit organizations. Our lovely speaker holds a bachelor degree in sociology from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and a master's degree in social work from UNC Chapel Hill. Thank you so much.
Yeah, hi, everybody. My name is Mia Ives Rubley. I go by she, her. Visual description, I'm very short. I'm in a wheelchair. I am Asian American or Korean American. I have somewhat short hair that is black but slightly gray. I am getting older. But anyway, and I would also like to say that I am not a lawyer. So none of my advice is legal advice. So, you know, I think what's been interesting is I've gotten to be sort of on the front row watching how repro advocacy and disability advocacy have sort of collided into one another at a very poignant time and at a very necessary time. You know, as the previous panelists talked about, there has been a significant tension between the disability community and the repro communities, partially because they just weren't talking to one another. There was no real collaboration between them, and part of that was because it was, you know, facilitated in order to misguide and disrupt the ability for women to maintain, women and people who can become pregnant, to maintain their bodily autonomy. So, you know, I think a lot of times we battle this approach from the other side that is intended to sort of separate our groups out so that we can't organize together and have so much difficulty communicating with one another. But one thing I'd like to really emphasize is that the fight for disability justice is the fight for reproductive freedom. And the fight for reproductive freedom is the fight for disability justice. So it's really important that they are integral to each other. There's no separation between the two. Both are a fight for bodily autonomy and a belief in the wholeness of a human being. Recognizing this gets us one step further towards a common goal of collective liberation. So that specific tenet within disability justice that calls for collective liberation that is wholly connected to reproductive justice. The problem has been is that voices of disabled people have been too long ignored in preference for hearing and honoring professional experts and family members. With that in mind, I know Rebecca Coakley, who was the one that actually started the Disability Justice Initiative at the Center for American Progress, worked in collaboration with Planned Parenthood and the Ford Foundation to co-host an event called Courageous Conversations on June 5th, 2018. And I know Dara Baldwin was there, and several other folks were there. They convened about 20 representatives from both the repro and the disability community. This had never been done. So what we did was we explored the intersections of reproductive rights and justice and disability rights and justice. We spoke about areas of alignment as well as tensions and challenges that have hindered collaboration between movements. This meeting led to further discussions between organizations post the Courageous Conversations, and CAP also continued these conversations until they worked in collaboration with others to develop the Disability Reproductive Equity Coalition. So I had a very honorable ability to first start as one of the people that was in that Courageous Conversations meeting, and then eventually become the director of CAP and actually lead it into a coalition of folks. And if you are interested in joining that coalition, feel free to contact me and I will add you to our list. We are always looking for new folks to join. So that's my sales pitch for today. As the coalition built steam Dobbs was leaked, leading to the eventual overturning of Roe v. Wade. Due to newer, younger, more diverse leaders in the disability leadership groups, numerous disability groups came out publicly to denounce that decision. And I don't know if you all understand how pivotal that was. That was a huge step for the disability movement to come out forcefully, publicly, saying that they did not agree with this decision. The coalition began to build a set of principles and goals that they'd like to achieve. One of them being to finalize the 504 regs for HHS to ensure access to accessible diagnostic equipment, because we knew that disabled women were often getting caught with reproductive related cancers at much later stages, resulting in higher rates of death, and not being able to access gynecological services as well. And it also addressed things like discrimination within the child protective services. On May 9th, 2024, HHS published the new rule. And so we were able to accomplish that tremendous goal of getting 504 rules passed through HHS. Also, the coalition was able to introduce a new bill on reproductive health care accessibility, which would actually provide training and funding to providers to help them understand how to work with individuals with developmental disabilities and helping them gain a better understanding of their own reproductive rights and opportunities. Lastly, we were able to get an introduction of a resolution creating a reproductive healthcare equity day. And this was due to our working not only from the disability lens, but the repro lens, having organizations like Planned Parenthood, like the National Women's Law Center, like NHELP, like AAPD. All of these groups came together to push and ensure that disabled women and individuals who can become pregnant be able to have their voices heard, which was extremely important to us. And so we are, as we all know, in extremely dangerous times right now. We have a president of the US who believes in fascism and eugenics and racism, and a secretary of HHS who is willing to implement those practices that will lead more disabled people to institutions like prisons and nursing homes, to work camps, which I'm absolutely astonished that I'm saying that. And we are going to continue to work with our partners to ensure that we fight for the general community. I also wanted to talk a little bit about what does that fight look like? And I think it's really important that we not only think of the usual tools that we have, which is the lawsuits, right? We're getting really good at lawsuits. And I gotta say, much props to all the lawyers in here. I decided not to go to law school. I'm kind of feeling a little left out, to tell you the truth. Yeah, my law professor told me not to go. And so I went to social work school instead. Yeah, lawsuits, great. We need them. However, we also need to think of outside of the box ways that we can support our communities, whether that is mutual aid, whether that is building a set of communities that can be a safe space for specific people. All of these actions are extremely important to be able to push back and create separate structures that we can rely on in our own communities to have a way to get the services and resources that we need. So I have actually been working with New Disabled South. It's been a real honor to be able to work with them. They have built several projects that are specifically focused in the South, particularly around the Black community and around migrant communities, because those are the ones that are most impacted right now, unfortunately, in the South. Trying to utilize some of the basic organizing principles that started in the South, which I proudly say that I am hoping that I am living up to some of those, some of the folks that came before me. But I've been really, really proud to see just the amount of work, not only from NDS, but from other organizations, the Abortion Fund down in the South, all of these different organizations that have been really stepping it up and ensuring that we provide mutual aid and legal support across the South to push back. And I know there's a lot of different groups that are also doing transportation. I joined into one of those groups as well. So I really want everybody to think about sort of how you can get involved and in different ways. And it doesn't have to just be through the usual structures and methods. It could be outside of those structures and methods. Also feel free to contact me if you are interested in joining the Disability Repro Equity Summit in DC. We are doing it as a hybrid method, sort of like this. And it is going to be an actual working summit. So we are going to be bringing people from across the disability and repro sectors to come together and actually work on talking about what our agenda is and what our strategies are. We're going to be sending out invites shortly, hoping within the next week. So please, if you can, contact me and I'll get you an invitation to come, whether virtually or in person. And I just want to say thank you for having me. I'm really, really glad to be here, and I'm super glad that this is happening.
For questions, if anyone in the audience has one, otherwise I have some.
Thank you. Sorry to be the chronic question after. My name is Chandra from Free Term, which is on the Independent Abortion Clinic. Mia, just obsessed with everything that you said and would love to join the listserv and would be very interested in attending the summit. I was curious for you if there's been any for the New Disabled South. I think there's some interesting intersections around how the impact of like the evangelical movement and like religious groups targeting disabled people, and
Mhm.
also often being spaces where disabled people get more support. I
Yeah.
think from the charity model of disability, religious people have been very involved. And one thing I always like to say, the Jehovah's Witnesses, as no matter what state I'm living in, as a deaf person, they find me. I don't know how, but they always find my address. And they are very, they're consistent and persistent. So, but I think that you see a lot of disabled people who are often isolated because of systemic barriers, and a lot of religious groups still stand in the gap there. And then we also know that obviously like the pro-life movement has been very rooted in evangelical spaces and religious spaces. And so I also wonder if some of the tension that exists between disabled groups and reproductive justice, also like the very intentional wedge that the religious movement has created. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about that. And then also, I think I was so excited to hear you talk about the support of disability rights groups with trans communities. Obviously, that was a tactic that they tried to do to prevent the passage of the ADA, and saying that it wouldn't apply to people who were HIV positive.
Right.
And so, and the disability community did not back down then.
Yeah.
And I'm really proud that we're continuing to not back down now.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that question. You know, one of the things that I think about, particularly historically, in the South, is how much churches played a role in the civil rights movement. And I think it's the problem has been that we need to get the groups, the churches, that are more open-minded, that are fighting for civil rights, of all people. I think we need to work with them to remind them that disabled people exist and that we need to do outreach to these communities. And I think that, I think we often assume things before we have conversations with certain groups. And I think it's going to be imperative that disabled groups work in collaboration with partners that they may not have worked with in the past, including certain religious groups. I'm not talking about the religious groups that think that, you know, you like existing is a sin. But you know, groups that have historically in the past done civil rights work, I think it's important to work with those, things like Reverend Barber, you know. I hesitate to just write off that part of the community. And I will say, in general, we did a poll a couple a year ago on sort of the current the specific viewpoints of disabled people on how they connected with abortion, whether they supported it or not. And what we found was that although the general like public consensus was that disabled people don't support abortion, we actually saw the opposite. We saw that in general of the total population of people who identify as disabled, they supported it at the same rates that the general public did. And that disabled women actually supported it more than non-disabled women. And so I think a lot of times we fall too much in the trap of listening to non-disabled people telling us where the community sits around these issues without actually talking to actual disabled people. And I'm sure a lot of us who have disabilities understand that situation quite well. So I think, you know, it's important that we continue to do the outreach to these communities. I know New Disabled South actually just hired somebody to specifically work on religious outreach which I think is fantastic. And I know, it's an essential part of working in the South is to bring, these religious groups in and have conversations.
I will also just butt in really quickly and say that we had a whole symposium last year here at Case, that brought together religious leaders from across different faiths and lawyers to talk about, the rights of religious leaders and religious communities to access abortion care if that's a part of their religion. Any other questions?
Hi, the data that you just referenced about, disabled people being very approving of abortion, even at higher levels, makes sense to me.
Yeah,
And it makes sense to me that people wouldn't assume that.
yeah,
Something that I've experienced as a disabled person is like infantilization or an assumption that like disabled people cannot be sexual people, and if they're not sexual people, they're not having abortions.
right.
And I was hoping you could, if I could hear some of your takes about that.
My takes, they can go really spicy, but. I think in general, I think you're spot on. There's a general desexualization of disabled people, which is not only affects, access to abortion, it affects education around reproductive health care, safe sex, and, dealing with situations like rape, and sexual assault. I think disabled people, as probably we all know, are more likely to be sexually assaulted than, other categories of individuals. Part of that, I think, is because we deal so much with the medical field and aren't given our bodily choices, and so it can become a sort of, I don't know what's going on type of thing, and I'm supposed to lie here and be compliant. So I think that, I think it affects every facet of any topic that you talk about when you talk about, repro issues and disability. I think also, the infantilization and the general, belief that disabled people can't make their own choices, which is very similar to how people view women oftentimes, or people who, can become pregnant. And so, this general belief that somehow we, can't make decisions. And also, I want to also connect it to guardianship, right? Because under guardianship, you have no choices. You may, receive a hysterectomy and you didn't want it. So forced sterilization, or you may get an IUD and you didn't want it, or you may be told you are not allowed to have sex. I think that there's been these, issues where children, disabled teens aren't given the tools to be able to go, because it is infantilization, to go from high school into adulthood. And so the immediate assumption is that they're going to go into guardianship. Also disabled people aren't allowed to make one bad choice. We make one bad choice and we can end up institutionalized, or we could end up under guardianship. And it's kind of wild to me, the fact that we aren't allowed to make bad choices, right? And I think about this quite a lot. And part of that is, again, infantilization, and desexualization of disabled people. So 100% agree with your comments.
Hi, I'm Dara Baldwin. We know each other. Thank you for this conversation, and thank you for Chandra bringing up about faith. And I just, as a Black woman, so those online can know, and much older than many of you in this room, that is correct. In the civil rights, it was centered in the churches, and it was centered because that was where Black and brown folks could come together and not be in a space with, and be in a space without white folks. That was safe, right? Was our churches, and that's why the civil rights moved from that space all those years ago. But I agree, and the conversation has to be about moving from that center of having that because of where we are as a nation. And then also I just wanted to ask you and bring this up, and I know Lori's not here, but I know she does this too, around right, the church and the because that's the Bible Belt, is the South. And that in every community, I don't care if there's 10 people living in that town or 1 million people living in that town, it is the church, right? It is the 3 most important people are the mayor, the sheriff, and the pastor. Well, it depends. With 5 people, they don't have a football team, right? With 5 people, they do, but they got them 3, right? There's always law enforcement, right? So I just want to say that. So, but I wanted to also ask is like, what does that look like in a conversation in the South? Because we center that, like they center that place. And I say we, I'm in DC, people don't think DC is the South. We are, we're below the Mason-Dixon line. And then I also wanted to connect it to, since we are in here, I'm not a lawyer either, but when the ADA was done and the Christian community, right, asking to be exempt from it was not Black and brown, right? It was the conservative, right? And that conversation doesn't happen. And what happens there? So I just wanted to like bring that in.
Yeah.
How does that look in that conversation? And then the young lady back here touched on what I was talking about too. What I want to bring in as too is sexual education of sex to students with disabilities and how we fought for it. And they kept telling me, well, it's an IDEA. And I was like, I'm reading this and nowhere does it say you can't teach children with an IEP about their life. But it came from the Southern Christian, that thought process of, right, if you teach them. So like, how do we make that, or are you making that connection in this Reproductive? Because, right, it's like the before, the during, the after. It's the before, especially in the South. When they don't want, right, you don't discuss this, right? You don't discuss money, you don't, right, those stuff. So I just wanted to put that up.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of not being a lawyer and actually coming from an organizing space, coming from doing campaigns, community organizing, I think that I've learned a lot of lessons in that work. And one of those lessons is coming to groups with no intention, coming to just listen. I had an interesting conversation with this individual during a campaign once, and he, like, I spent so much time emailing this guy, and he was like avoiding me like the plague. And I kept on emailing him, and then he finally responded and said, "Fine, when are we meeting? Where are we meeting?" And I was like, "We can meet wherever you want." And he was like, "All right, fine, we'll meet at your campaign office." And I was like, "Great, wonderful, let's do it." He comes in, and the first thing out of his mouth is, "I'm more conservative than you. We don't agree on candidates. I don't know why we're having this conversation." And I was like, "That's fine, that's okay. I just want to sit and talk and hear what are the concerns in your community." And this was a South Indian guy, which, just to let you know, like, getting into the South Indian community is extremely hard. And so he sat down and we just started chatting, and I was like, "Hey, like, what are the top issues that you hear from your constituents?" And he's like, "Oh, like, pharmaceuticals are too expensive, and I don't like the way that the schools are run, and blah, blah, blah." I was like, "Oh, great. Thank you for letting me know." And we just continued to have a conversation. We got to like an hour afterwards, and he was like, "I am so thankful that you just came to listen." That's all it took, was literally being like, "I'm not here to press my agenda on you. I might do it later, but right now, no agenda. I want to hear from you. Let's reflect on what you have to say. I'll bring it back to my boss and we'll figure it out." He actually invited me to his community event and said that I could pass out my stuff to his people because he was just so pleased about the fact that I wasn't trying to push anything on him. And I think that's the way we have to go, because so many of these communities have been talked at. You know, campaigns have come in and been like, you need to do this. You have to vote for X. And it's not productive. A lot of these communities feel used. People pop in, they pop out. That's about it. They don't really care about the people who are actually being impacted by these policies. And so I think that the best mode is just listening and just going and talking and having that coffee or having that chai with individuals and being like, hey, I'm just here to listen. And let's talk about eventually how our things align. And here's the areas that we can work on. We might disagree over here, but it looks like we agree on this. We agree on like people should have food. That's an easy one. Let's talk about SNAP. Let's talk about mutual aid and food kitchens, etc. Maybe we won't touch this very niche area that we might not agree on. But then it gives you the time to have those conversations and maybe, you know, eventually learn from each other on why certain things are important for one another.
Hi, Mia. This is Amanda Spriggs Reed speaking for the live stream. I'm also from North Carolina. I grew up in Winston-Salem, right next to Greensboro, which is the start of the counter sit-ins in the civil rights movement. And I know a lot of really talented organizers who, like, that's not their main job, like they just do that because they care in really grassroots levels. And I just like think about the ways that it's a resource problem for organizers in the South.
Most definitely.
And a lot of talented organizers in the South, like they know how to fix the problem. They just don't have the resources to be able to do that. They need flexible funding, or they need like training or resources in other ways beyond just funding. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about trying to shift funding from national organizations into these grassroots people who are really talented in the South, and dispelling this kind of preconceived notion that like there's nobody doing anything in the South, or that like sending resources there is a lost cause because of the way that people have been disenfranchised.
One, all the work is being done in the South. And you know, people are just not seeing it. Partially because they're not in it for the Instagram, they're in it for, you know, actually protecting their communities. So I will say that. I think that I've always been trying to figure out how we can get resources down to specific communities. One of the things that I've been really trying to work on for a while, and wrote a paper about it, is how do we get Medicaid dollars, those community Medicaid dollars, into the pockets of some of these organizers to provide mutual aid through a health lens of saying, hey, we have a nutrition problem, this is how we can fix it. We need to get calories into these individuals. So just thinking about like, okay, what are the structures now? How can we utilize some of those structures to help? But also, how do we build other structures that can be more resilient? So I know a lot of organizations provide micro grants that oftentimes can just due to tax reasons, because if you just give individuals money, they have to look at the taxes if they want to, you know, not end up in tax jail. And so looking at things like micro grants, looking at things like organizations that can actually, and I forgot the wording for this, basically hold the account for the organization and just dole out the money as requested. So there's a lot of varieties that can be done to try to protect the groups and ensure that the funding goes down where it's needed. We need more of it, of course. And I think that one thing that I really want to emphasize, just generally, is go local. You know, I even though I'm at a national organization, yes, we need money, but whenever I talk to somebody and they come up and say, how do I fight back? What's my first step? I'm like, go local. Find that local organization that you get along with and, you know, feeds your soul, and go to it, see how you can help. I was actually surprised. I was actually able to get my mom, who's been very resistant to do anything, to finally actually start working at a organization in Greensboro to try and do some local work. So yeah, local is so important, and I think we so often have our brains on the national level because that's where all the news is happening. But it's local where you can actually protect communities and actually make real differences. Because us at the national level, we're just banging our heads against the wall and trying to reduce as much harm across the nation, and that's not fun. It isn't. So, yeah.
Hello, my name is Steph and I'm a fellow social worker. Thank you so much for being here. I'm also a lawyer and I self-identify as a disabled cyborg. So my question for you is, I'm very interested in building resilience into the resistance. And so do you have any strategies or tips for navigating oppressive systems so that we can continue to be sustainable and have long-ranging movements without burning ourselves out?
Yes, and don't roll your eyes yet. Finding joy. And I say that not as an individualistic thing. I'm not saying, oh, you should go on your vacation. Oh, you should like ignore what's going on, etc. What I'm talking about is finding community joy. Finding the wins in the work that you do. Finding ways that remind you of why you're doing the work that you're doing. And so whether it is getting one person that you are mentoring into college, like that should be a joy. Whether it is connecting somebody to domestic violence shelter, that can be a win, right? Finding those little wins, because so often we are so entrenched in the work that we do because it is so important, and we understand the odds, we understand the harms, and it can turn you into sort of very tunnel vision to where you just see everything as bad and you see yourself losing everywhere. And I know I have to do better at this as well, but really setting those goals, measurable, doable, and being able to celebrate when you achieve those goals. Whether it's getting 10 people to attend your community events, whether it is, you know, buying, you know, a cup of coffee for a loved one who's been in pain or something like that. It's literally trying to find things that keep you going. And I think that is one of the most important things that we can do as community, is, Zini, what you doing, buddy? Zini would like to find some joy. Wouldn't you? Yeah. You good boy? He's my joy. But yeah, also my frustration. So yeah, I say that as sort of the number one thing, and then the second thing is finding your community. Zini, come here. Here, you're gonna be stubborn, aren't you? Zini, want it? Here. Oh, that's it. Here. Go down. No, yeah. Come on. This is why he's going to be retiring soon. He's done sitting down. Can you down right there? No. All right, we negotiated. Yeah, finding your community, people who can support you. Yeah, whether it's a Slack group, whether it is, we get margaritas on Fridays group. Whether it's, we'll cry on each other's shoulder on Saturday group, you know, find those people that can really support you, and help you sort of navigate, the things that are going on.
Any other questions?
This is Dara Baldwin again, and as thank you, Stephanie, for asking that. I just wanted to add to what Mia just said. When you find your community and doing that, you also have to set and make demand for those parameters. And I'll just say this, I'm from DC statehood, we're fighting, this man is in our backyard. And we started Free DC, which is a resistance group. And the first thing we did was set up those principles. We have, team leaders and people were starting having meetings on Sundays. I'll let you know, for us as Black people and Black organizations, Sunday is a day of rest. And I let people know, I will not be attending your meeting on Sunday. So, right, you set those parameters. Now we've been doing this for almost 5 months. And literally now people are saying, oh, we understand, and we're starting to take Sundays off. So it's one thing to have it, but if you don't set those parameters and tell people this is how this is, right? And when they notice, because if you're gonna send a movement on Black people and you have a meeting on a Sunday and the Black people aren't showing up, what are you doing? Right? And so I just want to say that people will do that, but if you don't make, like the demands we're making in the streets against the people we're fighting, you gotta make it with the people you're fighting with too.
Any other questions? Or do you want to ask one of our big questions for us? We got a couple more minutes.
We have time. I honestly, I looked at all of them and really covered, across the whole continuum, but, the questions were unique or heightened barriers existing for disabled folks accessing care in the South. I think we kind of hit on that. What do you see as strengths of folks and organizations in the South working towards reproductive and disability justice? And I think we hit it in a couple of places. That if you like any of these, let me know. What can we learn about solidarity and movement making from Southern organizers? That might not be one.
Thank you, Dara, for talking about that. I think, let me start with something and then I'll sort of veer into one of the questions. Also, I think that cultural competency is extremely important. And if you're with a Jewish organization, don't do things on Friday, Saturday. So really understanding the groups that you're working with, and even if they're not your main people, if there are organizations that you're working for or with, understanding their parameters as well. And if you don't understand, always ask. It's better to ask than to be wrong. And not ask. So make sure that you get as much information as possible around the parameters that you need to keep in mind while doing the work. In terms of specific things that I have seen in the South, I think somebody talked a little bit about this, but the general disinvestment in the South, and the general sort of flippant nature of how people see the South, has been disheartening to say the least. As somebody who grew up in the South, who grew up where a lot of the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s really got hold in there, where I learned a lot of the work that I do now and reflect on it. And it's because they see them as not valuable because of their vote. which is not much different from how a lot of Southerners view people of color, Black and brown in particular. And so us doing the same amount of harm to some of the most vulnerable communities in the South is ridiculous. And we can't say that we're on a better footing than those who are explicitly racist. One of the things I always tell people when they ask me how I feel about growing up in the South is like, I would rather be stabbed in the front than the back. I would rather be able to know that this individual is not on my side versus having somebody pretend that they're going to be on my side and stab me in the back. So, you know, I think that we need to stop valuing things based on electoral basis and really focus on the fact that these are communities that matter and that no matter their electoral sort of usage, that it's important that we invest in these communities as much as possible. So I think that's one of the issues that I often see, particularly after the first Trump election. We heard of a lot of organizations saying they were pulling out of North Carolina because they said North Carolina was no longer a viable state. And so we saw tons of community organizations lose funding. And they had to let go of tons of organizers because of this lack of faith and lack of understanding that organizing is year round. It's not just during election season.
I think we have time for one last question and then we're gonna have a break real quick.
Hi, everyone. My name is Madeline Morrisell. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a senior attorney at the National Health Law Program. I wanted to build on what Mia just said and also piggyback on what she said earlier in response to Amanda's question about some of the dynamics between national organizations and currently at a national organization, and also what Mia said about the divestment from Southern orgs. Before NHELP, I was the director of public benefits law at the Mississippi Center for Justice. I'm not from the South, but I spent most of my 20s in the South. And the divestment is real, and the power dynamics between national orgs and Southern orgs are incredibly harmful, like as a whole. I wrote about this exact issue in an op-ed last year for Rewire News Group. It's called Why We Need to Let Southern Social Justice Activists Lead. But what I want to talk about is another model for how national groups can work with Southern groups. So at the National Health Lab, I joined NHELP in early 2020 at the start of the pandemic. And in the summer of 2020 was having a lot of conversations with my friends across the South who I had worked with for years about how we could support the work that they were doing in meaningful ways at the intersection of sexual and reproductive health rights and justice and Medicaid. And what we heard was that there wasn't any sort of network for information sharing and capacity building and peer-to-peer learning that anyone had invested in around advancing sexual and reproductive health rights and justice and Medicaid for Southern advocates. And we were asked to help incubate a space like that. And so we started doing it as an unfunded project, but eventually we're able to secure funding, and the model is this. Number one, we have a network of sexual and reproductive health rights and justice advocates, legal services advocates, PNAs, and other partners interested in this intersection, grassroots groups, who we bring together to share information about what's working, because so often what's working in one Southern state within that political landscape can be replicable. We also have created capacity building projects where, working with our paid steering council of Southern advocates across movements, we identify winnable projects to move sexual and reproductive health rights and justice forward in Medicaid, and create advocacy toolkits to help scale those wins across the South to prove up to funders beyond the funder that is investing in us and allowing us to provide pass-through funds, but to prove to the broader philanthropy space that wins at this intersection are possible in the South and that they are worth investing in. Because what happens in the South eventually ripples and reaches the rest of the United States, whether it's the civil rights movement and the wins that were achieved starting in the South or jobs, right? So that's one model of what this could look like. And I think the most important part of that model is our paid steering council and doing work that is for and by Southern activists, because the people closest to the problems are closest to the solutions.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're gonna wrap this panel. We have a 15-minute break. Go out, use the bathroom, get some snacks. We are also gonna do a book raffle during this panel, or during this break. We'll do it right before we start the next one, from our wonderful panelist, Dara. And she's willing to sign one of the books, or all three of them that we're gonna raffle off. So come back in time for the raffle, go take a break, and we will see you all shortly. Thank you so much.